All right, everybody, FITSNews founding editor Will Folks with our research director Jen Wood. We are outside Moselle. Over my shoulder, 21 months ago, Alex Murdaugh killed his wife, 52-year-old Maggie Murdaugh, and his younger son, 22-year-old Paul Murdaugh. For much of the past 2 years, Jen, we've been saying allegedly. We've been saying accused killer. But as of this week, Alex Murdaugh is a convicted killer, and those crimes are no longer alleged after a Colleton County jury, 12 members, unanimously found Alex Murdaugh guilty of the double homicide that occurred, again, just over my shoulder here at Moselle on June 7, 2021. Jen, it's the end of one part of this odyssey, but it's not the end of this story. The Murdaugh murders, crime, and corruption saga continues, and we're going to talk about how it's going to continue later on in this segment. But before we get to that, we wanted to recap for our audience everything that happened over the course of this climactic week of Alex Murdaugh's double homicide trial in Walterboro, South Carolina, just a half hour up the road from here. Jen, can we even process this at this point? Everything that we've witnessed in this story?
I'm still processing it. I mean, it feels surreal that this part of the story is kind of come to a conclusion.
And what a conclusion it was, folks. We're going to start our review with a recap of some of the key moments from the final days of this trial in Walterboro, the trial of the century in South Carolina, which came to a thunderous conclusion, 3 unbelievable closing arguments.
Yeah.
One from attorney Creighton Waters, the lead prosecutor for the state of South Carolina, who has just been dominant throughout this trial, Jen.
Yeah.
Creighton Waters was followed by attorney Jim Griffin, one of Alex Murdaugh's top lawyers. And then beyond that, we had
John Meadors.
John Meadors, who delivered the state's rebuttal to Jim Griffin's closing argument, one of the most thunderous, impassioned, powerful pieces of footage we've ever seen that we've had on our air. We're going to cut to that here in just a moment. But as we're here outside Moselle and there's a ton of tourists driving by taking pictures, this place has become such a focal point for this tragedy, sort of a memorial almost to Maggie and Paul Murdaugh. But Jen, let's talk first about the justice that they received in Walterboro this week. What did you think when you heard those verdicts read?
Oh boy, it was emotional. I mean, it felt like finally somebody was being held accountable for this tragic crime.
And we're going to start our show with a clip from the closing argument, the impassioned appeal from lead prosecutor Creighton Waters, who has been so good throughout this trial.
Amazing work.
Handling the financial component of this and handling some of the key witnesses. But let's cut real quick to Creighton Waters during his closing argument.
On the other hand, has fooled everyone who thought they were close to him, everyone who thought they knew he was who he was. He's fooled them all. And he fooled Maggie and Paul too. And they paid for it with their lives. Don't let him fool you too. On behalf of the state of South Carolina, I ask you to return a verdict of guilty against the defendant, Richard Alexander Murdaugh, for the murder of his wife, Maggie, and his son, Paul, and for his possession of firearms during the commission of those malicious offenses. Thank y'all for your attention during this long trial.
All right, so Jen, Creighton Waters showing there just, when we came into this trial, everyone thought, could this guy hang with Dick Harpootlian?
Yeah.
And what we found was, could anybody on the defense side hang with Creighton Waters?
Creighton Waters. Yeah, I mean, he had a command performance of the courtroom. He managed to tie all of these crimes together. The financial crimes, the motive, the means, the opportunity, what happened on June 7th, 2021, tie it all together and package it up for the jurors to take and deliberate on. I thought he did a wonderful job.
He did, and not only that, there were multiple objections during this trial on key
Yes.
issues related to the admissibility of evidence regarding to testimony. Creighton Waters was a master going back and forth with the defense attorneys because, let's be honest, there were a couple of times these objections could have gone either way.
Yeah, and when you think about objections when it comes to court cases, I mean, these attorneys have to be on their feet. They have to think about, is this a point where I want to object? Do I want the jury to see that this is something that's a big deal? Do I, and then when the objection's made, they go back and, you have to argue case law as it comes up, which is it's fascinating to watch. And Creighton Waters did a really good job because there were a lot of objections from the defense.
He did an absolutely magnificent job thinking on his feet, coming up with the rationalization and the justification for what he was doing. And the other thing that I found incredibly impressive, Judge Clifton Newman made him do it and made the defense attorneys do it.
Yeah.
If there were objections in this trial, Judge Clifton Newman made the lawyers state their reason.
Right.
And then he made both attorneys argue those objections.
And your response.
Absolutely. And your response?
Yep.
I need to work that with my kids. But let's cut now. I wanted to, before we get to the command performance by Jim Griffin, and I took some grief for saying this on social media and in our broadcast, but I thought Jim Griffin's closing argument on behalf of Alex Murdaugh was incredibly compelling.
I agree. I absolutely agree. I thought he did a really good job.
And I felt like the jurors were all in and fully engaged in what he was saying to them. But before we get to his closing, there was something that happened which shaped the outcome of this verdict, Jen Wood. One of the jurors was removed for improperly communicating with others about these proceedings against Judge Newman's order. Let's cut real quick to that clip real quick.
Good morning. Is Jen okay today? All right. I have, as you know, we've had some discussions with you over the past couple of days concerning indications of conversations with few folks not on the jury concerning the case and expressing some opinion about the case. I have reviewed everything, including statements given by individuals and recorded interviews, and concluded that despite my order to not discuss the case with anyone, that intentionally or unintentionally you've had some discussions with some folks not on the jury, and which is going to require me to remove you from the jury. You have been by all accounts, great juror and smiled consistently and have seemingly been attentive to the case and performed well, and I'm sure that with all the time you've invested in it, you probably hate not to continue, or maybe you're ready to go, I don't know. But I certainly want to thank you for your service. I'm not suggesting that you intentionally did anything wrong, but that in order to preserve the integrity of the process and in fairness to all the parties involved, we're going to replace you with one of the other jurors. Have you brought everything that you have outside of, you left some stuff in there? What do you have in there?
A dozen eggs.
Say it again?
A dozen eggs.
A dozen eggs.
Yeah, one of the other jurors brought in eggs for everybody from the farm. So
okay.
eggs in my purse and nut water.
All right, well, you're going to leave the eggs. You want to leave the eggs or take the eggs? You're going to take the eggs. So, Mr. Bailiff, can you retrieve from the jury room her dozen eggs, her purse, and what else? And a bottle of water. If you can get those things from the jury room.
All right, so we're going to get back to why that matters, but for now, let's just stick a pin in that. But that removal of that juror, Jen Wood.
Yeah, Judge Newman's instructions were very clear. The jurors were not to discuss the case outside of the court or inside. Before, they were not to discuss what they were learning amongst themselves or outside of their jury duty.
Or what they thought about what they were learning.
Right.
Now, this jury began with 6 white females, which most observers felt was very bad for Alex Murdaugh. 3 of those white females, by the time this trial ended, were off the jury. 2 of them left because of COVID,
yep.
an outbreak that somehow managed to avoid the rest of the jury.
Thank goodness.
And then this juror, literally the penultimate morning of the trial, gone for violating Judge Newman's rule. But we'll get back to that in a moment. But first, Jim Griffin. I wanted to cut to a segment of his closing argument because, again, I think he was by far and away, next to Creighton Waters anyway, the top attorney in the courtroom throughout this trial.
Absolutely. I agree.
Well, let's cut to that clip real quick. Jim Griffin arguing his closing on behalf of Alex Murdaugh.
Up until now, you've not been able to say a single word. Can't imagine how frustrating that must be. But soon you will have the most powerful voice in this courtroom. With your words, you can let everyone know that in a court of law, only evidence and the burden of proof matters, not gossip, innuendo, opinions, and most of all, not theories layered on top of speculation. With your words, you can let the state know that they don't get to obtain an indictment by misleading a grand jury and then bring you before you a case built on theories, speculation. There are 2 words that justice demands in this case, and those 2 words are not guilty. The oath you've taken in this case is to follow the law, to follow the Constitution, and to hold the government to the burden of proof. And it requires a verdict of not guilty. On behalf of Alex, on behalf of Buster, on behalf of Maggie, and on behalf of my friend Paul, I respectfully request that you do not compound a family tragedy with another. Thank you.
All right, Jen, Creighton Waters and Jim Griffin weren't the only 2 attorneys that delivered command performances during this trial. Tell us about another one.
John Meadors did the rebuttal closing to the defense, and man, it was something to behold. It was passionate. It was powerful. Somebody compared him to a Baptist preacher, but I think you said his father was a Methodist preacher,
Father's
correct?
a Methodist preacher, that's correct.
So apparently he came by that skill set naturally.
You just took all my lines.
Sorry, man.
No, but that's it. That's absolutely exactly what happened. And watching the jurors, when he started with that, that Southern courtroom Matlock style, I was wondering, man, is he gonna nail this? This is a tough one to land. But did he ever?
Oh,
he
gosh,
brought
yes.
it home. Just incredibly powerful. In fact, let's cut to that real quick. This is John Meadors with his rebuttal closing, the final word in this trial. Let's take a look.
Finally, it's the book, Your Greatest Power. My dad gave it to me when I was young. He said, read it. Your greatest power. You know what it is? Your greatest power is your power to choose. Choice. We've all got it. We're born with it. We use it every day. We use it when we treat people, whether we say, hey, whether we're nice, whether we forgive people. We make good decisions. We make bad decisions. But what my dad always told me, don't blame anybody else. If you make a good choice, that's good. Don't get too cocky. Be humble, but that's good. But if you make a bad choice, you're responsible for it. There are consequences. It's your greatest power. And for whatever was going on in his mind, his world's collapsing. It's coming down. All these world is coming down financially. He's confronted that day by somebody's law firm. Where's this check? He's got another hearing coming up. It's a motive. Don't have to have it. But yeah, it's there. And is this rational? You remember when he said that? Is that rational? Was it rational to be on the side of the road and claim you're shot? And when you're in the ambulance, and go watch this if you need to, and you're talking to the officer in the ambulance, and you say, what happened? Oh, by the way, he wanted to kill himself. He called 911. He called 911. When he told the officer in the ambulance, well, what happened? Well, some guy shot me. He even did a sketch. He faked the sketch. But what did he tell the guy in the ambulance? It sounded like a shot. He's trying his world, and he says there in that last interview with the call-in interview, Mr. Harpootney and Mr. Griffin, what you got in there. Ryan, I'm sorry, I lied about everything. I was under a lot of pressure, had a lot going on. Really? Your wife and your son were murdered 3 months ago, and now this is the real Alex. Well, my world's coming down. My world, Alex's world is coming down. Been confronted by his law partners. Losing his job. Now it's me. My world's being affected. Not about that, but now. And I'm sorry I lied. I've lied about everything. Richard Alexander Murdaugh I think he loved Maggie. I think he loved Paul. But you know who he loved more than that? You know who he loved more than that? And who he's going to make sure that life, wanted to make sure that life, he loved Alex. And he exercised his greatest power of choice to make sure that life continued, or try. And it couldn't. And now, ladies and gentlemen, after his honor charges you, you're going to go back there and exercise your greatest power. Based on the evidence you've heard, the evidence you haven't heard, the credibility, the believability of the witnesses, and especially of Richard Alexander Murdaugh, who has lied and lied and lied and lied. And it's been okay. He got you through. It stops here. We respectfully request it stops here today. No, it's not okay. And we're going to exercise our greatest power and find you guilty of killing Maggie and Paul. Thank you.
Jen Wood, nothing short of a revival speech there. What'd you
Right.
think?
It was amazing to watch. He did a great job. And then right after that, Judge Newman gave the jury their instructions. The lengthy instructions, but not, some people said it would be hours. It took about a half an hour and handed it over to them to start their deliberations.
This was at 3:50 p.m. on Thursday afternoon, Jen, when the jury got that case, and it did not take them long. We'd been going back and forth. There was a lot of discussion about whether or not this jury would return a verdict. Mm-hmm. If so, how long would it take them? We got our answer very quick, and it was, in fact, this news outlet with a couple of tweets from, I don't want to say inside the courthouse, we'll just say near the courthouse, which signaled that this was about to happen. And Jen, let's cut to that moment where 7:04 p.m., the court comes back into session, and just a few moments later, Clerk Becky Hill reads the verdicts. Let's cut to that right now.
The defendant will rise. Madam Clerk, you may publish the verdict starting with the back, not with the, let's see, I'll tell you again. Starting with the back, flipping them over one by one. State of South Carolina versus
Docket number 2022 GS 15-00592, the State of South Carolina, County of Colleton, in the Court of General Sessions in the term of 2022, July, the State versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh, defendant, indictment for murder, SC Code 16-3-0010, CDR Code 0116. Okay. Guilty verdict. Signed by the forelady, 3/2/23. Docket number 2022-GS-15-00593, the State of South Carolina, County of Colleton, in the Court of General Sessions, the July term of 2022. The State versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh, defendant. Indictment for murder, SC Code 16-3-0010, CDR Code 0116. Verdict, guilty. Signed by the forelady. Date 3/2 of 23. Docket number 2022-GS15-00595. The State of South Carolina, County of Colleton, Court of General Sessions, July term 2022. The State versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh, defendant. Indictment for possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. SC Code -16-23-0490. CDR Code 0549. Verdict, guilty. Signed by the foreperson of the jury. Date 3/2/23. Docket number 2022-GS-15-00594. The State of South Carolina, County of Colleton, Court of General Sessions, July term 2022. The State versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh, defendant. Indictment for possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. SC Code 16-23-0490. CDR Code 0549. Verdict, guilty. Signed by the foreperson of the jury, 3/2/23.
All right, Jen, with this verdict guilty on all counts, let's go into what we were talking about earlier. The juror who we just told you about earlier in the episode, who was removed by Judge Clifton Newman. Jen, she was a hard no.
She would have been a hard no. Absolutely would not have changed her mind, according to our sources.
In fact, we spoke with 3 different individuals very close to this deliberative process who indicated that had this juror not been removed, again, for cause,
Right.
had she not been removed, this would have been a hung jury. We would have had to do this trial all over again. Alex Murdaugh would not have been convicted, would not have been found guilty, and then the sentence that followed. But Jen, how close did we come to a hung jury?
Hours. We came within hours.
Now, Judge Newman indicated prior to removing this juror that there was a lengthy investigation,
Yeah.
spanned several days, and covered a number of different witnesses. And according to our sources, that this individual juror was not entirely truthful in some of her comments to Judge Newman. So obviously he had no choice but to make the decision that he made. But Jen, it was a momentous decision and had a momentous impact on this trial.
I mean, it changed the course of what I think would have happened.
Absolutely. Alex Murdaugh, in the aftermath of that verdict being announced, he turned as he was being handcuffed, looked to his surviving son, Buster, said, "I'm sorry, I love you, I love you." Buster Murdaugh made no response, Jen Wood. No response. Also, Buster Murdaugh and John Marvin Murdaugh did not speak on behalf of Alex Murdaugh at his sentencing the following day. The only person who spoke for him, Alex Murdaugh. Now, before we get there, Jen, we're going to talk about the sentencing in just a minute, but go back to this verdict. There was so much discussion about how long this would take, and the folks we spoke to in Walterboro, a town that we've come to know and love over the past 6 weeks, all the pundits from out of state.
It was going to be a week. It would be
Weeks,
5 days. There's no way they'll come to a decision.
Definite hung jury, they said. No one saw this coming, but our folks in Walterboro, all of them,
Every one of them.
to a person, said guilty and it'll be today.
Yep.
Guilty and it'll be the same day.
Yep.
As that verdict came down, you could feel it, and again, you feel it being here. I mean, you feel it again. It's a reverence. It's heavy.
Right.
The air is heavy here. It's you see these pines and the wind and the breeze, and it's so peaceful. And you think of it being all shattered on that night.
And all of the police cars that line the roads.
Absolutely. And as we've been talking about this place, our stand-in director of special projects, Brett Flashnick, has been throwing up some of the pictures from that jury visit. By the way, let's talk about that and the impact on the decision. On Wednesday of this week, at the request of the defense, remember that, at the request of the defense, jurors took a field trip right behind us, to the scene of these horrific crimes. And they spent a lot of time, Jen, at the door of that feed room of the kennels where Paul Murdaugh, literally his brain blown from his head by that shotgun blast. They spent a lot of time there.
The defense was trying to sell that story that he was shot from a completely different angle than what the forensic scientist and medical examiner had said. And the size of the room, I think, kind of showed that that was very likely not the case.
Well, let's talk about something else that showed that the prosecution's forensic assessment of the case anyway was spot on, and that was the graphic images of the crime scene that were the result of the carnage that took place here again 21 some months ago. Jen, we pointed out on our live broadcast that a lot of those images had been provided to our news outlet, some of them even prior to this trial beginning. We made the editorial decision not to show those. In fact, the images you're looking at and the footage you're looking at now is from Moselle, not from what happened at Moselle. I want to make very clear, and we're not going to show those images. I do think they're public documents. I do think at some point folks who want to look at them should have the right to do that. Let's talk now about the sentencing of Alex Murdaugh. Took place on Friday. Judge Clifton Newman, some of the strongest language, and yet this guy never raises his voice.
No.
He's calm. He's grandfatherly almost. And we're going to cut to that now. And not only the sentencing, but there's an exchange in here between Judge Newman and Alex Murdaugh that you simply have to see. Let's cut to that right now.
Mr. Murdaugh, if you'll come before the court for sentencing. This has been perhaps one of the most troubling cases, not just for me as a judge, for the state, for the defense team, but for all of the citizens in this community, all the citizens in this state, and as we've seen based on the media coverage throughout the nation. You have a wife who's been killed, murdered, a son savagely murdered, a lawyer, a person from a respected family who has controlled justice in this community for over a century, a person whose grandfather's portrait hang at the back of the courthouse that I had to have ordered removed in order to ensure that a fair trial was had by both the state and the defense. And I've sat through the trial. Not only have I sat through the trial, but also as the presiding judge of the state grand jury, sat through and participated in the issuance of search warrants of various sorts, bond hearings, and have had to consider many things. And we have this case, and I'm also assigned to preside over 99 others, at least 99 other cases. Though testimony has come up regarding many of those other cases, I will not make any comment with regard to any other pending matter, as I have been assigned those cases as well. It's also particularly troubling, Mr. Murdaugh, because as a member of the legal community and a well-known member of the legal community, you've practiced law before me, and we've seen each other at various occasions throughout the years. And it was especially heartbreaking for me to see you go in the media from being a grieving father who lost a wife and a son to being the person indicted and convicted of killing them. And you've engaged in such duplicitous conduct here in the courtroom, here on the witness stand, and as established by the testimony throughout the time leading from the time of the indictment and prior to the indictment throughout the trial to this moment in time. Certainly, you have no obligation to say anything other than saying not guilty. And obviously, as appeals are probably expected or absolutely expected, I would not expect a confession of any kind. In fact, as I've presided over murder cases over the past 22 years, I have yet to find a defendant who could go there, who could go back to that moment in time when they decided to pull the trigger or to otherwise murder someone. I have not been able to get anyone, any defendant, even those who have confessed to being guilty, to go back and explain to me what happened at that moment in time when they opted to pull the trigger, when they opted to commit the most heinous crimes known to man. In this case, qualifies under our death penalty statute based on the statutory aggravating circumstances of 2 or more people being murdered by the defendant by one act or pursuant to one scheme or course of conduct. I don't question at all the decision of the state not to pursue the death penalty. But as I sit here in this courtroom and look around the many portraits of judges and other court officials and reflect on the fact that over the past century, your family, including you, have been prosecuting people here in this courtroom, and many have received the death penalty, probably for lesser conduct. Remind me of the expression you gave on the witness stand. Was it tangled?
Tangled web, we weave.
Oh, what tangled web we weave. What did you mean by that?
It meant when I lied, I continue to lie.
And the question is, when will it end? When will it end? And it's ended already for the jury because they've concluded that you continued to lie and lied throughout your testimony. And perhaps with all the throng of people here, they, for the most part, all believe or 80, 90%, 99% believe that you continue to lie now when your statement of denial to the court. Perhaps you believe that it does not matter, that there's nothing that can mitigate a sentence given the crimes that were committed. You know, a notice of alibi was filed in this case by counsel in November, and we conducted a hearing, pretrial hearing, in which you claimed to have been someplace else at the time the crime was committed. Then, after all of the witnesses placed you at the scene of the crime, at the last minute, or last minutes or days, you switch courses and admitted to being there. And then that necessitated more lies and continued to lie. And I say, where will it end? It's already ended for many who have heard you and concluded that it'll never end. But within your own soul, you have to deal with that. And I know you have to see Paul and Maggie during the night times when you're attempting to go to sleep. I'm sure they come and visit you. I'm sure.
All day and every night.
Yeah, I'm sure. And they continue to do so. And reflect on the last time they looked you in the eyes, as you looked the jury in the eyes. I don't know person who's always been such a gregarious, friendly person can cause your life to be tangled in such a weave web, such a situation that yours have spun into, and it's so unfortunate because you had such a lovely family of such friendly people, including you, and to go from that to this. You know, your license to practice law has been stripped away from you. You turned from lawyer to witness, and now have an opportunity to make your final appeal as an ex-lawyer. And it's almost, it's really surprising that you're waiving this right at this time. And if you opt to do so, it's on you. You're not compelled to say anything. But you have the opportunity to do so.
Judge, I tell you again, I respect this court, but I'm innocent. I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my wife, Maggie, and I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my son, Paul.
Well, and it might not have been you. It might have been the monster you become when you take 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 opioid pills. Maybe you become another person. I've seen that before. The person standing before me was not the person who committed the crime, though it's the same individual. We'll leave that at that. Before announcing sentence on these cases, with regard to all of the other pending cases, are any of them here in Colleton, or I'm sure some of them are?
Yes, sir.
Half of them, or?
I don't have that in front of me, but there are a substantial number of charges here. There's some in Hampton, Orangeburg, Beaufort, Allendale. There may be others that I'm not thinking of right now.
We might have worn out our welcome here in Colleton. They have been, and I'll take this opportunity to thank Sheriff Hill and all of the court officials and really everyone I've met and dealt with while here in Colleton County. Just been great. But without any delay, we're going to schedule some of the other matters. I know Mr. Harpootlian's scheduling is complicated, and you've sacrificed quite a bit to be able to be here defending Mr. Murdaugh, as well as the Attorney General's office, with all the other many things and obligations you have. And to be able to have the Attorney General here, Alan Wilson, for the period of time that he's devoted to being here, along with everyone else, it's been quite a sacrifice. But there are other victims whose cases deserve to be heard. And this case has jumped some of those other cases, perhaps jumped it because of this case resulting in an assault on the integrity of the judicial system in our state, law enforcement in our state. Even during this trial, the law enforcement have been maligned for the past 5 or 6 weeks by one who had access to the wheels of justice, to be able to deflect the investigation. And as the evidence is pointed out in this case, the looming storm that Mr. Waters talked about, I can just imagine on that day, June 7th, when a lawyer is confronted and confesses to having stolen over $500,000 from a client, and he has a tiger like Mark Tinsley on his tail pursuing discovery in the case involving the death of Mallory Beach, and having a father, for the most part, on his deathbed. I could imagine, or really can't imagine, but I know it had to have been quite a bit going through your mind on that day. But amazingly, to have you come and testify that it was just another ordinary day, that my wife and son and I were out just enjoying life. Not credible, not believable. You can convince yourself about it, but obviously you have the inability to convince anyone else about that. So if you made any such arguments as a lawyer, you would lose every case of that, like that. Cases you will never have an opportunity to argue anymore, except perhaps your own as you sit in the Department of Corrections. Anything further?
No, sir.
All right, Mr. Murdaugh, I sentence you to the State Department of Corrections on each of the murder indictments in the murder of your wife, Maggie Murdaugh. I sentence you for the term of the rest of your natural life. For the murder of Paul Murdaugh, whom you probably love so much, I sentence you to prison for murdering him for the rest of your natural life. Those sentences will run consecutive. Under the statute involving possession of a weapon during a violent crime, there is no sentence where a life sentence is imposed on other indictments. That is the sentence of the court, and you are remanded to the State Department of Corrections. And officers may carry forth on the imposition.
Jen Wood, he said that his victims would haunt him when he tries to sleep. Have you ever haunt him in his dreams? Have you ever heard? My goodness.
I mean, it was the words he used. I mean, I had goosebumps, and I don't do that very easy. Like it kind of.
You're dead inside.
Yeah, I'm dead inside. I mean, it just left me speechless, and I think I hope it made an impact on him as it did me. I mean, he said, who have you become? Like, are you like?
Maybe you didn't do it. Maybe it was the monster you became.
And he referred back to Alex's own quote of Sir Walter Scott. Oh, what a tangled web we weave.
That's right. As you saw in that clip, Newman asked him, what was it you said on the stand? And then, why did you say that?
Right.
What made you say that? And Murdaugh responded, I lied and I had to keep lying, basically. And and then the other moment I thought that was just so, again, gut-wrenching to listen to. But Newman's so calm, so measured. But,
right.
Again, when he's talking to Alex Murdaugh about how he knew him, how Alex Murdaugh had come in his court, how his family had its hand on the wheel of justice.
Right.
And he talked about the death penalty, and he said he didn't fault the state for not seeking the death penalty, but he talked about prosecutors in that circuit seeking the death penalty in cases before him in that courtroom for much less, he said.
Yeah.
We're going to talk in just a moment about all the cases to come. As we said at the outset of this program, Alex Murdaugh's double homicide trial is over, but the Murdaugh murders, crime, and corruption saga is just starting. This was the first state case related to it. In fact, we've got many, many more to come. We're going to talk about those in a minute. But before we get to that, we wanted to talk briefly and share a clip from the defense's response. The defense's response to the ruling, the verdict, the sentencing from Judge Newman. Let's cut to that real quick as attorneys Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin discuss their upcoming appeal, which will be filed, we're told, within the next 10 days. Let's cut to that real quick.
We'll file a notice of intention to appeal. Then we've got 30 days, I think, to file a brief.
Yeah, so you file the notice within 10 days. You got to get a transcript.
Oh, that'll take a while.
That'll take months before they type up everything, and then we start briefing.
Are you all going to handle the appeal?
Yes.
And are you ready to Court of Appeal to the Supreme Court?
And the U.S. Supreme Court.
And the U.S. Supreme Court if necessary. That's correct.
What's the federal issue?
Doyle.
Oh, there's a huge federal issue. That's why I got so animated that the judge told me to sit down. Part of the trial is the state eliciting or asking questions of Alex about why he did not come forward and tell law enforcement where he was at the time of the kennel video. And that was after he was arrested, and there's U.S. Supreme Court cases are clear that post-arrest silence cannot be used against you. And that is a classic violation of the Fifth Amendment. And we feel strongly that if we lose at the state courts, we'll have success at the federal court.
Right, we're going to watch it as it makes its way again. The first level will be the state appellate courts. Next level would be the state Supreme Court, and then obviously Murdaugh's attorneys have a right to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court on these federal grounds. But Jen, I got to say, Judge Clifton Newman was incredibly careful.
Yeah.
Incredibly reasoned, incredibly measured, incredibly circumspect in his decisions in this case on every front.
Right. I mean, his knowledge of the law and ability to apply it, and he's very thoughtful in how he makes his rulings. I'm sure he's had things go up on appeal before. I mean, I really do think that he thought about the decisions he was making during the course of this trial a great deal.
Well, I love during the trial at one point, Attorney Griffin challenged Newman on a ruling and said that he had been overruled by the appeals court, and Newman fired back, correct, but I was upheld by the Supreme Court.
Yeah,
You know,
yes.
Newman firing back, and then he corrected Griffin on another case. I don't think anyone has much of a shot going up against Judge Newman on the particulars of these cases.
I don't either, but you know, I do think that's the route that they go next.
It's their job to try, and I want to say this, from the very beginning of these proceedings, this news outlet has endeavored, in keeping with our open microphone policy, in keeping with our marketplace of ideas commitment, we have approached this thing with open minds, and yeah, I gotta say I'm very proud of that, because you know, there's a lot of activism in the media these days. There's a lot of picking sides, and certainly we've had strongly held beliefs about this case, and we're not shy about expressing them, but we're also not shy about saying that we're open to being convinced otherwise. I mean, we want the truth. That's what it's about.
When we started covering this trial 6 weeks ago, that was my goal, was because I do know a lot about this case, I think probably more than most. And to me, I had already had a lot of set convictions, and it was important for me to go into this trial and listen to what was being presented like it was new information, to consider it as a juror would consider it, because, you know, what they're presenting is different from sometimes what I know.
Absolutely, and from the very beginning of these proceedings, that's what we've done. We've come at it as though we're basing it on the facts as presented.
Yeah, and it's easy to villainize a defense attorney, but you know, everybody charged with a crime has the right to a defense, and they have a job. That's their job.
That's true.
And I mean, somebody's got to do it.
And these attorneys on both sides did a fantastic job. There's been a lot of criticism on social media, particularly against the defense, particularly against Dick Harpootlian. He obviously didn't have his best trial, but you know, the thing about Dick Harpootlian, he did a magnificent job when the jury was out of the room, arguing the technical motions of the case.
Right, and that's where to me Dick shines. It's when he's, you know, he's arguing the law, he's arguing motions, he's arguing, you know, to me, that is when I saw him shine. And Jim Griffin, in his closing argument, when he stepped up there and approached things, I thought it was really interesting because he had a very soft tone. Like, I felt like he was approaching it the way he needed to approach it.
Right. Throughout this trial, one of the things that impressed me the most about Jim Griffin was his ability to cross-examine witnesses on the other side without coming off as hostile, without coming off as belligerent or obnoxious. And
there were a lot of witnesses, like Maggie's sister, Marion Proctor, who obviously, you know, it was a very emotional thing for them. It was the first time we'd heard from her publicly. She had spoken to Maggie the night that she had died, and it told her to go to Moselle. And I could see that she had...
Told her to come here?
Yeah, told her to come right here. I could see that she had immense regret. I could see that it hurt. And I thought his approach when he was cross-examining those witnesses was good. It was soft. It was what it needed to be without traumatizing them further.
It was, and as we saw earlier, Griffin's closing argument, I thought it was incredible. I thought he covered all the bases he needed to cover. I just think the facts were against him. The timeline.
The timeline.
Of what happened here, folks, the timeline is what sunk Alex Murdaugh.
Yeah, I mean, 8:44 p.m. on June 7th, 2021.
8:44 and 50 seconds.
50 seconds.
That's when that infamous video was shot, and right behind us, shot right behind us at these kennels. And less than 5 minutes later, Paul and Maggie Murdaugh's cell phones silenced forever. And the state, that timeline became even more difficult for Alex Murdaugh when he took the stand against the advice of his attorneys, we're told. Although they said in their press conference after the trial that they felt they had no choice but to let Alex Murdaugh take the stand. I don't know if that's accurate based on the way that he was introduced as a witness. Notice they did not say the defense calls Alex Murdaugh. They said the defendant wishes to testify.
Right.
But it got harder for Alex Murdaugh the moment he admitted to that jury that he lied about being right here at that time.
Which was very early on in direct examination. And he was on the stand for a day and a half.
A day and a half. And the first day, he held his own.
I thought he did. I was surprised.
He held his own. He even scored some points talking about SLED agents allegedly lying about blood on his shirt.
Right.
And Jim Griffin, in his closing argument, had one of the best lines I heard the entire trial, talking about that bloody shirt. And they said that he went from being Mr. Bloody Shirt to Mr. Clean.
Right.
Because the second that bloody shirt was no longer in evidence, all of a sudden the prosecution became focused on Alex Murdaugh having no blood on him. And Griffin was like, wait a minute, you can't have it both ways.
Right.
It was compelling.
Right. It was. But that timeline, that night on June 7th, the more they questioned him, the smaller the box he was in on that timeline. I mean, they narrowed it down to that 5 minutes between the beginning of that video and when their cell phone stopped forever. And they're just, I mean, there was no way around it.
And in case you missed our last week in review, which was shot on location outside the Colleton County Courthouse, Jen Wood and I went into detail on that timeline the entire evening of June 7, 2021. So if you haven't watched that week in review, you can click back on it on our YouTube page from here. But Jen, let's talk now about where we go from here. And I can't think of a more fitting place and a more fitting moment to talk about that. But where do we go from here?
Well, we still have 99 charges. 99 open charges, a number of indictments in multiple counties that are open. Judge Newman sounded like in his closing argument, or in his sentencing, sounded like he was going to move those quickly. He said those victims deserve justice.
He's ready to go.
Yeah, just like Maggie and Paul. So yeah, we're going to be keeping an eye on those. And we've heard that additional indictments are coming at the state and federal level soon.
That's true. We've got financial crimes, dozens of them. We've got drug charges. We've got potential obstruction of justice charges. We've got charges related to the Labor Day 2021 roadside shooting, which figured prominently in this trial.
We've got Curtis Eddie Smith, Cousin Eddie.
Cousin Eddie's trial.
Right, we got his trial coming up. We've got Corey Fleming's trial coming up. And we've also got Russell Lafitte's state trial coming up.
And let's not forget, we've also got on this, those are all criminal trials.
Right.
But let's not forget, we've got this massive civil case still hanging out there. The case that was key to the state's theory of motive as to what happened here on June 7, 2021. It was that boat crash hearing, which was scheduled for 3 days after the savage slayings that took place here at Moselle on June 7. And Judge Newman, you could tell that registered with him. He said, you would have us believe that it was just an ordinary day. An ordinary day.
Right.
But the storm was gathering, and that was what Creighton Waters, that was his theme this entire trial, Jen Wood.
And Judge Newman harkened back to that. I mean, it was, yeah, and he said, you know, you had a lawyer like Mark Tinsley who's a tiger coming after you.
In the civil case,
Yeah, I mean, clearly Judge Newman knew that that was part of what was going on in Alex's mind on June 7th.
Absolutely. He said, you might not have done it, it might have been the monster you became. Folks, we are where that monster was unleashed in violent, gruesome fashion, claiming the lives. Again, I'm 52-year-old Maggie Murdaugh, 22-year-old Paul Murdaugh, and we've talked about Paul Murdaugh. He was facing felony boating under the influence charges in connection with Mallory Beach's death, but you've said something that has stuck with me all week, particularly after viewing those crime scene photos. No one deserved to die like that.
No one.
No one deserved to die like that, no matter what they did. So again, on behalf of everybody at FITSNews who's been covering this, we want to extend our condolences to the victims in this case. And also I want to say something to the family, John Marvin Murdaugh in particular, and Randy Murdaugh. I want to say something. Those two gentlemen throughout this trial, and a lot of folks had issue with John Marvin Murdaugh's testimony. Jen, you had some holes to poke in it. I did too. But I just want to say on a personal level, those two gentlemen, incredibly gracious to everyone at our news outlet. And I want to thank them for that. And also, I don't know what they're going through. And I want to just let them know that on behalf of the entire Fitz family, we're thinking of everybody impacted by this tragedy. But also rest assured, there will be no stone left unturned as far as our news outlet is concerned.
We have a lot of rabbit holes to jump into, and even more so based on the information that came out of this trial. And we will be getting into those quickly.
Yep, Jen Wood has been key to our investigation of the drug angle to this case, which we still believe plays a much bigger role than has been revealed in the trial that we just witnessed. We're going to be staying on that angle. Jen Wood, you're still digging into financial transactions, property records. That's where all the truth lies, doesn't it?
Yeah, the property records, I'm telling you what.
Follow the money, they say? No, follow the property. Follow the property, follow the LLCs.
Yeah, those names, Barrett Boware, Greg Alexander.
You think they'll come up again?
Zero United Drive, Redbeard LLC. If you haven't looked at those yet, go ahead and put those into the little search engine on FITSNews.com, and your mind's going to be blown.
Also, Jen Wood has already been hard at work detailing some names that she's uncovered in the master timeline that the South Carolina State Law Enforcement Division released this week related to this murder trial.
I'm sad to go home, but I'm anxious to get home because I'm ready to start writing again.
Absolutely, and at FITSNews we are going to begin that process of processing everything that we learned, because recapping what happened this week obviously, but as we move forward, so much information. We talked at the beginning of this trial how we would go a month on Murdaugh News and we wouldn't get anywhere near to getting the amount of information we got in one day.
Right.
One day of this trial.
Right.
So we're going to be breaking it all down. Jen Wood, you're going to be pulling at threads. Dylan Nolan, our Director of Special Projects, is also going to be digging. I'm going to be working my sources, and we're going to continue to bring you everything we can find out, because, folks, what happened here, we do have some justice.
Yeah.
We do have some justice, but the Murdaugh murders, crime and corruption saga, there's a lot more victims than just Maggie and Paul. There's a lot more missing money, a lot more lives ruined and wrecked, a lot more institutional corruption involving judges, because Clifton Newman is a man of honor.
Right.
Clifton Newman is a man of integrity. But there's a lot of judges in this state that aren't, and a lot of them were joined at the hip with the Murdaughs. So again, you count on us to continue driving and digging and pushing for the truth on those. But for now, I couldn't think of a more fitting place to be to conclude this particular odyssey of this still unfolding saga, Jen. Here at Moselle, where on the night of June 7, 2021, 2 people lost their lives in what prosecutors successfully proved was a man who was at the end of the line, out of options. A man who killed to save the one person that Judge Newman said was more important to him than anyone else, himself. On behalf of Jen Wood and our entire FITSNews team, I want to thank everybody who's joined us for these last 6 weeks. We've been on location in Walterboro the last 5 weeks, and here at Moselle for the final edition of our weekend review from the Murdaugh double homicide trial. Keep it tuned to FITSNews.com for your very latest Murdaugh murders, crime, and corruption saga news, and count on us to continue pursuing this story till the very end.